Lands of Our Ancestors, Chapter 9, A Small Vacation. Time passed as Solomon and Salape recovered from their whippings, but ever since witnessing the severe public floggings, none of the native laborers felt like working as hard as they had before, and the usual punishments really had no effect in correcting this behavior. The priests could see that their laborers were more depressed than ever and less productive than ever. After repeated arguments and pleas, Father Espiritu was able to convince the head priest to allow the natives a small vacation. Father Fierro agreed to allow a few Indians at a time to visit their traditional food gathering sites and home villages, with, of course, an escort of mission soldiers led by Captain Castigar. So under guard of a full contingent of turtle men, Kilik and the people of his village could journey to one of their traditional fishing sites to catch fish. Then they could travel to one of their local camps to collect acorns, as they'd always done. To the people from the place of the river turtles, it was a glorious day. They set out from the mission after their usual morning meal of tasteless paste and headed south. The adults carried wooden bowls or baskets loaned to them by the mission priests. And during the journey, the soldiers even allowed them to speak one to one another in their native tongue. As they walked, Kilik and Tuhui picked up small stones and threw them at fleeing ground squirrels, pretending to be on a hunting trip. Stook, who stayed close to her mother, looked for ladybugs and other small insects on the leaves of familiar plants. Their parents walked arm in arm along a part of a trail they'd used hundreds of times in better days. They dared to allow themselves to forget their prison labors within the mission. When they reached the river, the children immediately jumped in. Kilik and Tuhui splashed each other with handfuls of the cool, refreshing water. Their regular baths of bygone days had almost become a forgotten memory. Quickly weaving makeshift nets from nearby vines, the men waded in the river to snare salmon and other fish. The women spread out along the riverbanks for search for wild lettuce and other edible plants. About an hour of splashing and fishing, Kilik's group decided to move on toward one of their traditional acorn gathering areas close by. They didn't know if they'd ever be allowed to prepare the acorns to make them suitable for acorn soup, but it just felt so good to be gathering, to be in the midst of the natural world. They filled their bowls and baskets to the brim and then took everything in the middle of the old camp. This camp was similar to the one Kilik and Solomon stayed in during Kilik's one and only hunting trip. Lighting a fire in the old fire pit, the women skewered the salmon on long sticks for cooking. When the fish were done cooking, several of the soldiers rushed to the fire pit and helped themselves to the feast, pushing aside the women who'd done the cooking. The Chumash could do nothing but watch the men gorge themselves and then eat what was left. "Now we will visit your home village," Captain Castigar announced. "You need to move along quickly so we can get back to the mission." Kilik and Tuhui couldn't believe their ears. They were going to go home, at least for a little while. They skipped toward the trail as their families headed out from the acorn camp. However, their joy was short-lived. As they approached the place of river turtles, none of the familiar sounds of daily life could be heard. All was eerily quiet. And as they stepped into the village area, there were no signs of life, no smoke rising from cooking fires, no children playing hoop and pole. The place was a ghost town. Several of the Thule Reed homes had collapsed. The only movement seemed to be a few small wild animals scurrying about looking for food. Then a figure from the far end of the village approached Kilik's group. It was an old Chumash man. When he came closer, Kilik saw that it was one of the Council of 12, nothing but skin and bones. He looked worse than the Indians at the mission. This is what we wanted you to see," Captain Castigar said smugly in Spanish. There is nothing left of your home. You have nothing to go back to. As Kalik and the others began to realize this truth, the old man came close enough to be heard. He, of course, only spoke and understood Shumash. I don't know what the man said to you, but men who looked just like him rode in here on their beasts and started rounding up our people, the old man said weakly. Some escaped and ran off who knows where. The captured ones were dragged off, leaving only my wife and I and a couple of other old people. I guess we are too old and weak to be of any use, so they didn't bother with us. He coughed and wheezed a few times before continuing. With no one to help us hunt or collect food, we slowly starved. Now I'm the only one left. He coughed again. I'm not long for this world myself. Where have the rest of our people been taken? Solomon asked the captain of the guard in Spanish. None of them were brought to the mission where we are. Other missions need workers too, the captain replied. Your people are probably scattered up and down these lands. Kalik and his people were heartbroken. Their home no longer existed. Their place in the middle world had disappeared. And the rest of the Shumash people had been scattered to the 4 directions. The old man stepped closer to Solomol and Salapai, who stood close to one another, and spoke to them in almost a whisper. They say there's a place across the northern mountain range where our people have gone, he said. They've joined others who have escaped the strangers' work camps. Do you know where this is? Solomol asked. Is it far? The old man looked at Captain Castigar suspiciously. Are you sure he can't understand us? The elder asked. Not a word, Salapai confirmed. He thinks our language is worthless. Good. The place is near the base of Sacred Mountain, the old man said, but the strangers watch the main trails looking for runaways, so you have to take the old animal paths to get there. Enough of this gibberish talk from an old man, the head of the guard bellowed. Time to move on. Back to the mission now, all of you. They bid a sad farewell to the man who once was a respected leader, the last survivor of the place of river turtles. The soldiers hurried the heartbroken people along, wanting to get back to the mission and their comfortable quarters as soon as possible. But Kalik lingered a moment longer. What are you doing, son? Solomol asked. You'll get hit upside the head if you don't move along. I want to take one last look at the place we used to call home, Kalik replied. I want to remember who I am and where I come from, like you told me to, Father.